The stranger in the wreckage, the land was quiet where nothing moved except dry winds and broken metal. Once this place had been a thriving colony, but now it was only ash and rust. The war had ended long ago, yet the ground still remembered the fire. Markin walked slowly through the empty streets of the dead outpost. His boots crunched over shattered glass and twisted wires. He carried a worn-out bag slung over one shoulder filled with tools and scraps. His back was bent with age, but his steps were steady. He had lived alone for many years in this quiet place surrounded by silence and shadows. Every morning he followed the same path across the ruins, checking each broken building for signs of life or danger. He spoke to no one, and no one came looking for him. That was how he liked it. People brought noise and trouble. Machines were easier to understand. This morning his path took him to the old relay tower where he once repaired signal relays for passing ships. The structure leaned to one side, half collapsed. Markin climbed the steps carefully, watching each plank before placing his foot. Inside the main control room, everything was coated in thick dust. The air was dry and still, but something felt wrong. He heard a sound faint and soft like a breath or a whisper. Markin paused and tilted his head, listening harder. The sound came again from beneath a broken desk in the far corner. He moved closer slowly, not making a sound. When he knelt beside the desk, he saw a small shape huddled in the shadows. It was a child, but not a human child. Thin arms wrapped around bony knees, dark skin, marked with faint patterns across the cheeks and arms. Her eyes were large and glowing faintly in the dim light. She looked at him with fear and exhaustion. Markin said nothing. He opened his bag and took out a sealed packet of emergency food. He placed it gently on the floor in front of her and backed away a few steps. The girl did not move. She watched him like a cornered animal, unsure whether he was a threat or a trick of her tired mind. Minutes passed. Markin remained still. Finally, the girl reached out slowly and pulled the packet toward her. Her fingers trembled. She opened the packet and ate without looking away from him. She did not speak, and Markin did not ask. He knew the signs of hunger and fear. He had seen them in too many eyes long ago during the war. This child had been left behind, forgotten by those who had fled or fallen. When she finished eating, she curled up again, her eyes closing as sleep pulled her down. Markin did not leave. He sat near the door, watching over her through the night. The next morning, Markin wrapped her in an old blanket and carried her back to his shelter. It was a quiet place built from salvaged metal and old ship parts tucked beneath a cliff far from the patrol routes. He laid her on a cot and checked her for wounds. She was bruised and thin, but nothing seemed broken. Over the next few days, Markin cooked simple meals and left them near her bed. The girl ate in silence, never speaking. She followed him with her eyes but made no move to escape. Markin spoke to her now and then in a gentle voice, but she gave no reply. He named her Leary, not because she told him her name, but because of a small symbol on a broken bracelet she wore. The letters were faded, but Leary was still clear enough for him to read. Leary began to move around the shelter after a while. She walked slowly, always keeping close to the walls. She flinched at sudden sounds and light, but showed curiosity in the machines Markin worked on. She watched him fix an old solar panel and followed the motion of his hands. Markin started to explain things as he worked, using simple words and calm tones. He showed her how to twist wires, how to connect broken circuits, how to power up faded lights. She never answered, but he saw understanding in her eyes. At night, she would sit near the heater, wrapped in the same blanket he had given her. Markin sometimes saw tears on her cheeks, but she never made a sound. He never asked her what had happened. She would speak when she was ready. One evening, Markin found her looking at a piece of shattered glass. She stared at her reflection as if trying to remember who she was. Her fingers touched her own face, slowly tracing the marks on her skin. Markin watched from a distance, not interrupting. Outside, the world remained quiet, but Markin knew the silence would not last. Sometimes signals flickered through the old comms tower. Unregistered transmissions, short and coded. Not many people came here anymore, but those who did often had reasons to avoid attention. Still, Markin kept his routines. He repaired what he could, salvaged what he found, and taught what he knew. Leary remained near him, watching and learning. She still did not speak, but he no longer felt alone. In her presence, something old inside him had started to wake. A part he thought had died with the war. Something like hope, something like purpose. And deep inside the shelter, far from the broken world above, a quiet bond was beginning to form. One human, one alien, both forgotten, both healing together in silence. But no longer alone. The bond begins. The sky above the outpost was filled with gray clouds that never moved. The air always smelled like old wires and dry metal. Markin woke before the sun each morning. He moved through his shelter with quiet steps, making sure everything was still working. The heater buzzed softly. The power cells held enough charge. The water filter hummed in the corner. Everything was in place. Leary sat on a small bench near the wall, wrapped in the same blanket as before. Her eyes followed Markin as he worked. She did not speak. Her mouth stayed shut, but her eyes said many things. Fear, confusion, curiosity, all mixed together. Markin had learned to understand what silence meant. He had lived with it for many years. Today, he cooked something warm. He crushed a few dried herbs into a boiling pot and stirred them slowly. The smell filled the room. Leary sat still, but her nose twitched. Markin smiled to himself. He placed a bowl on the table and stepped back. Leary waited for a long moment before walking forward. She picked up the bowl and held it close. Her hands trembled slightly, but she did not drop it. She took careful sips, her eyes flicking between Markin and the steam. Markin watched her with calm eyes. He did not rush her. He did not speak. Outside, the wind howled against the metal walls, but inside the room stayed warm. After she finished eating, Leary set the bowl down gently and looked at the small pile of tools nearby. Markin took one piece of wire and held it out to her. She looked at it, then looked at him. Markin gave a small nod. She reached out slowly and took the wire between her fingers. Markin then picked up a broken sensor board and pointed at the damaged part. He showed her where the wire needed to go and what tool to use. Leary copied his actions with care. Her hands moved slowly, but they did not shake this time. Day by day, she learned more. Markin showed her how to clean solar panels, how to replace burnt fuses, how to check power levels without using a reader. She watched everything he did. She started picking up tools before he asked. Sometimes she even handed him the right part before he reached for it. Still, she did not speak. Markin never forced her. He believed words would come when she felt safe enough. He had seen too many people push too hard too fast. Healing needed time. Trust needed space. One evening, while checking an old broadcast receiver, Markin picked up a strange signal. It was faint and broken, but the code was clear. Not natural, not weather, not background radiation. Something or someone was sending short bursts of encrypted data across the wasteland. Markin narrowed his eyes and adjusted the tuner. The signal repeated once every 3 hours. No voice, no message, just bursts. He saved the frequency and turned off the receiver. He did not want to worry Leary. She was sitting on the floor near the heater with a small light in her hand. Markin had given it to her after she fixed the connection inside. Now she played with the beam, casting shadows on the wall. That night, Markin could not sleep. He sat near the door with his old rifle leaning beside him. He remembered the way some people had hunted for scraps. After the war, not just metal or food, but people. Those who were weak, those who had no one. In the morning, Markin told Leary they would move some supplies to a safer storage below the shelter. He did not say why. Leary helped carry boxes and tools. Her steps had grown stronger. She no longer leaned on walls as she walked. Her eyes scanned everything around her with quiet care. Later that day, Markin showed her how to lock the hatch from inside. He pointed to each switch and waited for her to repeat the motion. She did without mistake. Then he gave her a small piece of metal with numbers scratched into it. It was the code for the backdoor.lir. I took the metal and looked at it for a long moment. She turned it in her fingers. The threat returns. The wind outside had changed. It no longer moved in soft waves, but carried sharp bursts of air that scraped against the shelter walls. Markin stood near the window with a scanner in his hand. The signal from the old receiver was back again, but this time stronger than before. It came from the south and carried traces of motion codes. That meant someone was sending active pulses through the dead zone. Markin knew these kinds of signals. He had used them in the war to scan ruins and track survivors. Whoever was sending this signal was not searching for help, but for something. Hidden inside the shelter, Leary was drawing lines on the floor with a piece of chalk. She had started using symbols to show what she saw in her thoughts. Markin often studied them at night, trying to understand her meaning. Some symbols looked like planets, others like parts of machines or strange creatures. One symbol kept repeating a tall shape with wings and sharp eyes. Markin sat beside her and pointed at that one. Leary looked at it, then at him. Her fingers moved across the chalk slowly, and she added another mark beside the winged shape. It looked like a cage. A cold feeling spread through Markin's chest. He picked up his scanner and checked the signal again. Then he turned on the outer cameras mounted around the shelter. A dark shape moved near the edge of the canyon wall. It was not large, but it moved with purpose. Markin tapped the screen and zoomed in. A drone hovered silently between two broken trees, its red light blinking at slow intervals. He turned off the screen and walked to his weapon rack. It had been many years since he held a weapon with intent. He pulled out a pulse rifle, checked the charge, and strapped a pack to his back. Leary stood up watching him. Her eyes asked a question she could not voice. Markin knelt beside her and placed both hands on her shoulders. He spoke slowly and clearly, explaining that someone was coming and they had to prepare. Leary did not move. Her eyes stayed locked on his. Then she reached into her pocket and handed him the metal code he had given her before. Markin shook his head and pushed it back into her hand. He told her to keep it safe and stay close to the hidden room below. Leary hesitated, but finally nodded. Markin opened the hatch and led her down the tunnel that ran beneath the shelter. It connected to a hidden bunker he had built long ago for emergencies. The door was strong enough to hold back heavy fire, he showed her how to seal it from inside, then return to the surface. His steps were slow but firm. The time for waiting had passed. By nightfall, 3 more drones had appeared. Markin avoided them, using the terrain to move unseen. He climbed an old ridge where he once installed a solar relay. There he planted small mines and laid down trap lines. Each mine used a burst frequency that disrupted tracking sensors without causing noise. These would confuse the incoming crew and buy him time in the morning. Leary climbed back up to the shelter. Markin scolded her at first, but when she showed him a small device in her hand, his anger faded. She had built something from old parts while in the bunker. The device tracked low-energy pulses from nearby machines. She pointed to the corner of the map where a cluster of signals blinked. Markin stared at her with new eyes. This child was not only smart but also brave. He took her hand and nodded with pride. They now worked together, not just as protector and survivor, but as a team. They moved quickly, packing supplies into a sled built for rough terrain. Markin uncovered a buried shuttle hidden under metal sheets and dry earth. It was an old model, but still held power. The engines needed repair, and the navigation module was cracked, but it could fly if given enough care. As they worked, a shadow passed above them. A transport ship, low and silent, drifted through the gray sky. Markin pulled Leary under cover and held her close. The ship dropped something small from its belly, a pod that struck the ground with force. They waited until the sound faded, then crept forward to see. The pod had opened, and a figure stepped out wearing dark armor with no markings. The figure scanned the area and turned toward the direction of the shelter. Markin whispered to Leary to return to the tunnel. She shook her head, but he pointed with firm eyes. She ran back without sound. Markin moved toward the figure, using the terrain to stay hidden. He raised his pulse rifle and aimed. The figure stopped and looked around, but saw nothing. Markin pulled the trigger, but held back the shot. Instead, he threw a small flash unit to the side. When it burst, the figure turned and fired in the wrong direction. Markin moved behind and knocked the weapon from the figure's hands. A short fight followed, but Markin's strength and skill. He tied the figure with wire and dragged the body to the canyon edge. There he sent a false signal using the figure's comms, making it look like the area was clear. Then he pushed the body down into the fog below. By nightfall, more ships would arrive and this place would no longer be safe. Markin returned to the shelter covered in dust and wounds. Leary ran to him and helped clean his face with a wet cloth. She sat beside him all night, keeping watch while he rested. In the morning, Markin stood again. His eyes clear, his decision made. They would not stay here. The world had moved on, and they needed to move with. I told Leary they would leave before sunset. She did not ask where. She trusted him now completely. And in her silent way, she let him know that whatever came next, she would face it with him. They stood at the edge of the canyon, looking at the broken land below. A shuttle waited in silence, power building, light humming, engines warming. Their journey was not over, but the path had changed. Together they would rise above the ashes and find something better beyond the ruins. Together they were no longer lost, they were ready to escape. The sky turned darker than before as thick smoke clouds gathered. In the air, strange lights flashed across the horizon. The earth under Markin's feet vibrated like something large moved far in the distance. He looked up at the shuttle resting quietly beneath the cliff and felt the weight of time pressing on his shoulders inside. The shelter, Leary packed tools and parts without being told. Her fingers moved fast, picking only what was needed. She had grown sharper with each passing day. Her eyes no longer held fear. They now carried focus and fire. Markin checked the shuttle. Once again, the engine chamber still had damage, but the core was stable. He replaced 2 coolant pipes and fixed the ignition wires using old fuses. Leary helped with the controls, checking the panel lights one by one. Each light blinked to life under her touch, like it knew her hands were no longer weak. Just before sunrise, the scanners caught movement. 5 armored figures marched through the far valley. Behind them, a large vehicle moved slowly, pushing aside rocks and debris. These were not scavengers. These were hunters trained to track hideouts and capture survivors. Markin knew the type well from his days in uniform. He ordered Leary to stay inside the shuttle while he set the last traps. She refused. She pointed to the side entrance where the old generator rested underground. She had a plan. Markin listened carefully as she explained through simple gestures and rough drawings. Her mind worked like a blueprint, always forming paths where others saw walls. They moved together. Markin laid down tripwires and pulse bombs along the main trail. Leary crawled through a vent into the lower section of the base and rerouted power from the generator to the outer floodlights. She also connected a circuit that could overload the perimeter sensors when the enemy crossed the marked zone. The hunters reached the outer rim by noon. Their scanners swept the ground and picked up false signals placed by Leary earlier. They split into 2 groups. One headed toward the shelter while the other circled the cliff, trying to find a second entrance. Markin watched from above through a cracked scope. He waited until the first group stepped over the hidden wires. A flash burst blinded them for seconds, followed by a shock wave that knocked their weapons loose. Leary triggered the lights, and the sensors overloaded, creating a curtain of static that blocked enemy vision. Markin used this moment to strike. He rolled down the slope and knocked 2 enemies to the ground before they could recover. The third one fired blindly and missed. Leary dropped a scrap box from the window, hitting the soldier's helmet and knocking him off balance. Markin moved fast and disarmed him with a swift motion. The second group heard the noise and rushed forward. Leary ran to the shuttle and began powering up the main thrusters. The ground shook again, but this time from the engine's roar. Markin jumped into the open hatch as Leary guided the controls from the co-pilot seat. Shuttle lifted slowly with smoke trailing behind. The last two hunters reached the cliff, just as the shuttle rose above them. One fired a hook line that attached to the rear panel. Markin pulled out a wrench and cut the cable without hesitation. The enemy fell back into the canyon, arms flailing. As wind swallowed the scream in the sky, the shuttle gained speed, but a warning light blinked red on the main screen. The stabilizer unit was cracked. Without it, they could not hold altitude for long. Markin turned to Leary, but she was already unfastening her belt. She opened the floor panel and crawled into the service tube. Markin shouted after her, but she gave no reply. Inside the tight space, Leary moved with purpose. She reached the damaged unit and rerouted power using the emergency bypass. Her fingers bled as sharp edges tore her skin, but she kept going. She used a spare coil to reconnect the circuit and reset the relay manually. The shuttle jerked once, then leveled. Markin watched the screens and saw the red light turn green. He called her name once, twice, no answer. Then the tube hatch opened, and Leary crawled back out, her face covered in dust, her hands red, but her eyes shining with success. Broke through the clouds into open sky, leaving the ruined world below. For a while neither spoke. Only the soft hum of the engines filled the space around them. After some time, Markin placed a blanket around Leary's shoulders and helped her cling the cuts. He handed her water and sat beside her in silence. She leaned against his arm and closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed and her body relaxed for the first time in days. Markin looked out the window at the stars ahead. His mind drifted to old memories of war and loss, yet now something had changed. He was no longer running from the past. He was moving toward something new. He checked the navigation panel and adjusted the course toward a hidden outpost once used for rescue missions. The coordinates were still in memory from years ago. It was a place where those forgotten by war could find peace and safety. The engines held steady. The power levels remained strong. The sky stretched wide in every direction. Leary slept peacefully. Beside him, her hand still holding the piece of wire she had used to save them, Markin whispered a promise into the quiet air, not for her to hear, but for himself to remember. He promised to protect her, not because she needed saving, but because she had saved him first, in ways he could not explain. Shuttle flew on through the endless sky, carrying two souls bound by survival, by trust, and by something deeper that neither could name. They were no longer part of the broken world below. They were writing a new story, one only they could understand, a new world. Stars outside the shuttle window moved slowly as the ship glided through space. Engines gave off a soft hum, and the lights inside flickered with warmth. Markin sat near the console while Leary rested with her head on a folded jacket. Her breathing stayed calm and her face looked peaceful. For the first time since she had entered his life, Markin saw her sleep without fear ahead of them. A faint signal blinked on the screen. It came from the outpost he remembered from his past. Years ago, it had been a safe zone for war refugees and lost travelers. Hidden between asteroids and cloaked by old tech, it had served those without homes or names. He had not thought of it in years, but the coordinates were still locked in memory. Markin adjusted the flight path and sent a request code. No reply came at first, but the beacon kept flashing. Minutes passed before a message appeared in simple text. Entry granted, dock in Bay 3. Stay quiet. Stay ready. He woke Leary gently and handed her a warm drink. She sat up without speaking and looked out the window. Her eyes followed the distant lights until the shape of the outpost came into view. It looked like a floating island surrounded by drifting rocks and soft blue glows. It did not shine like the cities before war. It held no grand towers or banners. It was a place built for safety, not pride. As the shuttle entered the docking bay, the outer lights guided them to a landing pad. The moment the engines powered down, the silence felt heavy. Markin checked the air levels, then opened the main door. Warm, filtered air rushed in, carrying a scent of clean metal, and old oil. Two figures stood near the entrance, dressed in simple clothes with scanner belts and calm faces. One was tall with gray hair, and the other short with strong arms. They greeted Markin without weapons and asked no questions. He gave them a short nod and stepped aside so Leary could follow. She stayed behind him but did not hide. The older figure looked at her with kind eyes, then pointed to a hallway marked with green lines. A place had been prepared for them ahead inside the outpost. Clean halls stretched in all directions. Children of different species walked quietly or played with silent toys. Some carried books, others carried tools. No one laughed loud, but no one looked afraid. This place held a strange peace, like a room after Reyna. Room was given to Markin and Leary, with soft beds, clean clothes, and a window showing a view of distant stars. They took showers and changed. Leary sat on the bed, running her fingers over a smooth blanket, while Markin stood near the window, thinking. Later, they were invited to a small hall where others gathered around a table. Food was shared without words. No one asked where they came from. No one asked what had happened. Here no past was needed for a seat at the table. Only presence, only peace. After the meal, a caretaker led Leary to a learning room where other young ones studied machines and languages. Markin watched from the doorway as she joined the group without fear. She picked up a tool and began working with another child on a small drone. Her hands moved with confidence and her eyes shone with focus. Markin walked through the outpost halls, learning its structure. He found an old workshop filled with broken devices and dusty shelves. The caretaker told him they needed help fixing power lines and storage units. He nodded and rolled up his sleeves. Each day, Leary joined classes while Markin repaired systems. They did not speak much about the past. They only looked ahead. Some nights Leary sat by the window drawing stars with a light pen. Markin would sit nearby with a tool in hand, fixing a broken wire or reshaping a metal plate. One evening, Leary placed a small object on his workbench. It was a figure made from scrap metal shaped like a shuttle with tiny wings and smooth edges. Markin picked it up and turned it in his hand. He looked at her, and she gave a soft smile. That smile stayed in his mind as he worked each day. It became a reason more than duty, more than survival. It reminded him that he had found something he thought was lost forever. Weeks passed and the outpost changed slowly. More people arrived from distant places. Some stayed, some moved on. Markin chose to stay. He turned the workshop into a full repair center. He trained others in simple methods taught by years of trial and error. His hands moved with care, his voice steady, his presence strong. Leary became known among the young ones as the quiet builder. She fixed drones, repaired circuits, and helped design new learning tools. Her words came slowly at first, just single sounds, then full phrases. The first full sentence she spoke to Markin was quiet, but clear. "Thank you for not leaving me," Markin nodded and placed a hand on her shoulder. No need for more words. The meaning had already been understood long ago. One morning, a visitor arrived, carrying news from distant systems. Peace had begun to grow in places once filled with fire. Paths reopened and bridges rebuilt. The outpost would expand to help more refugees. Markin was asked to lead the new engineering unit. He agreed without delay. Leary asked to assist in design and training. Her request was met with smiles and support. Together, they stood at the front of the repair bay, looking out over rows of new equipment and eager minds. No longer alone, no longer hunted, no longer broken. Markin had saved one life and in return found his own purpose. Renwood Leary had been rescued from hunger and fear, and now gave light and strength to others like Heron. A corner of the workshop, the small metal shuttle still rested on a shelf, a reminder of their journey from ruin to hope. Their story had begun in silence among ashes and shadows. Now it lived in motion, in memory, in shared hands building something better. And Though stars moved fast across the sky, and time never stopped, their bond remained as strong as steel. They had escaped not just from war, but from the weight of sorrow, and found in each other something more than survival. They had found home, the end.